They say that money makes the world go round. It doesn't, of course. Angular momentum left over from a swirling cloud of dust and gas when our solar system first formed, over 4.5 billion years ago does. But money is certainly very important in football. Over the last 35 years, we have seen an explosion of wealth in the game. The world record fee has risen from £8 million to £200 million. Elite clubs' revenues have risen by more than 2,000%, and the average wage in the Premier League has risen from £77,083 a year when the league was first formed in 1992 to £4 million a year, or between £70,000 to £80,000 a week now. That is a 5,000% increase in absolute terms, or a 2,300% increase when factoring in inflation. But just which clubs have been driving the rise in spending year on year? Well, in today's video, we're going to take a look at the biggest spenders in terms of both overall expenditure and net spend each season, which is interesting both in of itself, in my view at least, but also in terms of what it tells us about how the wealth and power of football has shifted over time. We will also take a look at some of their biggest signings, how they performed, and whether each team's immense spending resulted in success. I know, it sounds like an absolute blast, and it will be. So what the bloody hell are you waiting for, Alfie? Without further ado then, who was never signed by a club who spent the most money in a season, so doesn't feature. Here are the highest spending clubs in world football every season, from the 1990-91 through to the 2025-26 seasons. 1990-91, Juventus. From the late 80s to the early 2000s, one league reigned supreme, in terms of talent, expenditure and prestige, and that league was Serie A. In the 1990-91 season, the 5 highest spending clubs in world football were all Italian, as were 8 of the top 10. Marseille and Bayern Munich were the only non-Italian clubs to gatecrash the top 10, as clubs like Pisa and Torino outspent Real Madrid, Barcelona, and literally every club in English football. In fact, pre-Premier League, Chelsea and Liverpool were England's highest spenders in the 1990-91 season, ranking 18th and 19th in the world spending charts, only narrowly ahead of FC Nuremberg. Lazio, Bologna, Inter Milan and Roma ranked 5th through to 2nd, but leading the way, by a country mile, was Juventus. Juve spent over €34 million, close to 3 times as much as second place Roma, as they welcomed the likes of Roberto Baggio, Thomas Hasler, and Paolo Di Canio to the newly opened Stadio delle Alpi. Their spending proved to be fairly futile, as the old lady fell from 4th the previous season to 7th in Serie A, failing to qualify for Europe, with only Baggio, who was signed for a world record fee and finished 8th in 1990 Ballon d'Or voting, living up to expectations, following his extremely controversial arrival from rivals Fiorentina. Juventus also had by far the highest net spend. 1991-92, Juventus. If at first spending an absolute fortune doesn't work out, try again. That's exactly what Juventus did in the 1991-92 season after finishing 7th, as Italian clubs once again dominated all of the spending charts. Serie A clubs constituted 7 out of the world's 10 highest spenders, with Marseille being the most notable exception, as they forked out almost €15 million under Bernard Tapie in a desperate attempt to win the European Cup. Bari, who are now a second-tier club, were the second highest spenders in world football and the highest in terms of net spend, as they recruited the likes of David Platt and Frank Farina. Not that it did them much good, mind you, they were relegated the following season. Juventus narrowly pipped them solely in terms of expenditure, as Jurgen Koller, Dino Baggio and Antonio Conte, among others, joined Giovanni Trapattoni's Galacticos. Juventus were much improved, but still went trophyless, finishing a distant second behind Fabio Capello's unstoppable AC Milan in Serie A, and losing in the final of the Coppa Italia against Parma. 1992-93, Inter Milan. Blackburn Rovers were the 7th highest spenders in world football in the inaugural Premier League campaign, which was their first in the top flight for 8 years, but it was the Italians who led the way once again. The world's 6 highest spenders were all Serie A clubs, as Juventus were very narrowly outspent by Inter Milan, and the difference was less than €1 million. Having fallen to a bitterly disappointing 8th place finish in the 1991-92 season, Inter appointed Osvaldo Bagnoli and splashed out over €30 million on the likes of Salvatore Schillaci, Matthias Sammer, and, most notably, Darko Panchev. Panchev proved to be a total disaster, but Inter climbed from 8th to 2nd, only missing out on the Scudetto to their relentless cross-city rivals AC Milan. AC Milan, incidentally, had the highest net spend in 92-93, as they welcomed Ballon d'Or winner Jean-Pierre Papin for a world record fee from Marseille. 1993-94. Juventus. The biggest spenders in 3 out of the first 4 seasons of the 1990s, in which they failed to win a single Serie A title, Juventus were at it again in 93-94. Angelo Di Livio was their headline signing at the time, but it was a fellow signing from Padova, a young Alessandro Del Piero, who would go on to become Juve's finest signing that window. Inter Milan had the highest net spend, led by Dennis Bergkamp, but it was AC Milan who won the league yet again, as Juve and Inter finished 2nd and 13th. Inter only avoided relegation to Serie B by a single point this season, yet they lifted the UEFA Cup in what was nearly one of the biggest upsets in the history of world football. 1994-95. Roma. Everton had the highest net spend in world football in the 1994-95 season, and the 3rd highest expenditure overall, yet they went on to finish 15th in the Premier League that season, only 5 points above the drop. Big spending Blackburn won the Premier League in their lowest spending season since the league was formed, but it was Juventus, shock horror, and Roma who were the world's biggest spenders. Roma edged it, as Daniel Fonseca arrived for a huge fee from Napoli, but it was Juventus, bolstered by the arrival of Didier Deschamps, who finally lifted the Serie A title. Roma finished 5th. 1995-96. Inter Milan. Inter Milan owner and president Massimo Moratti further intensified the club's spending efforts in the 1995-96 season, splashing out close to €50 million on big hitters like Roberto Carlos from Palmeiras, Javier Zanetti from Banfield, and Paul Ince from Manchester United. The Nerazzurri led the way in terms of net spend and overall expenditure, yet they fell from 6th to 7th place, burning through 3 different managers. They ended the season with Roy Hodgson in charge, and Roberto Carlos was sold after a single season to Real Madrid. The rise of the Premier League, in financial terms, was becoming ever more apparent, as Newcastle were the world's 2nd highest spenders, Liverpool were 5th, Arsenal was 6th, and there were 11 English clubs among the top 20, but for now, Serie A's elite still just about ruled the roost. 1996-97. Real Madrid. For the first time during the 1990s, an Italian club didn't lead the world's spending charts in the 1996-97 season, replaced by plucky Spanish upstarts Real Madrid. In fact, the 1996-97 season saw a radical departure from the 1990s norm up to that point, as the world's 4 highest spending clubs, and 6 of the top 10 were all Spanish, led by Valencia, Deportivo La Coruña, Barcelona, and, at the very top of the tree, Real Madrid. Barcelona signed Brazilian wonderkid Ronaldo from PSV for a new world record fee, alongside the likes of Hristo Stoichkov and Laurent Blanc, but Real Madrid very narrowly outspent them in both net and absolute terms, welcoming the aforementioned Roberto Carlos from Inter Milan, along with Sevilla's Davor Schuka, Sampdoria's Clarence Seedorf, and their most expensive signing, Valencia's Predrag Mijatovic. Carlos became a club legend, meanwhile Schuka led Real Madrid's scoring charts as they climbed from 6th the previous season to win the La Liga title under new boss Fabio Capello. Barcelona, meanwhile, finished as La Liga runners-up but won a cup treble under Bobby Robson, with Ronaldo enjoying arguably the greatest debut season in football history, and among the greatest of all time full stop. 1997-98. Barcelona. It was a La Liga doubleheader again in the 1997-98 season, this time courtesy of Barcelona and Atletico Madrid, as Spain's biggest clubs benefited from independently negotiated television deals. In the long run, this would hurt La Liga versus the more egalitarian Premier League, but in the short term, it meant that Atletico could sign the likes of Christian Vieri from Juventus and Juninho from Middlesbrough, as, shall we just say, eccentric club president Jesus Hill authorised an enormous spending spree, with by far the highest net spend in world football, and Barcelona could go out and sign Michael Reiziger, Sonny Anderson, and, most notably Rivaldo, as new boss Louis van Gaal's squad was bolstered by world-class recruits and the highest overall expenditure. Barca's recruitment paid dividends, as they won a League and Cup double in Van Gaal's debut campaign, with Rivaldo leading their scoring charts. Vieri led La Liga's with 24 goals, but Atletico still only finished 7th, and they were relegated a couple of years later. 1998-99. Lazio. Lazio weren't just unfurling anti-Semitic banners invoking the Holocaust against their rivals Roma in the 1998-99 season. They were also leading the way as the highest spenders, in both net terms and overall expenditure, in all of world football. Returning that crown to Serie A, Lazio had the highest spending season in the entire history of world football, as owner and president Sergio Cragnotti backed manager Sven-Goran Eriksson with the equivalent of more than €100 million in the transfer market. Subject to football-specific inflation, that's about €450 million in today's market. Lazio brought Christian Vieri back to Italy, along with the likes of Sinisa Mihajlovic, Dejan Stankovic, and Sergio Conceição, culminating in a second-placed finish in Serie A, trailing AC Milan. Meanwhile, they won the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup. Inter, who were Italy and the world's second highest spenders, only finished 8th, as Real Betis came in 3rd, after breaking the world record fee to sign Denilson, with whom they would shortly be relegated. Blackburn Rovers led the way in the Premier League, but could only finish 6th, and in a reminder of just how much the power dynamics of world football have shifted, Rangers were the world's 7th highest spenders, above Man United and Barcelona. 1999-2000. Inter Milan. No team spent more money, in either net or absolute terms, than Inter Milan during the 1990s as a whole, and in truth, it wasn't even close. The Italian giants forked out an estimated €455 million, which was €155 million more than runners-up Juventus, and yet they didn't win a single Serie A title or Champions League throughout the entire decade. They won 3 UEFA Cups, it must be said, but they also finished 8th twice and 13th once, and were very nearly relegated. Overall, there were more misses than hits. The 1999-2000 season eclipsed all previous records, as Inter splashed out over €150 million, including a world record-breaking €49 million on that man again, Christian Vieri. He led Inter's scoring charts the following season, but they could still only finish 4th under future World Cup winner Marcelo Lippi, as Lazio lifted only their second and, as of yet, their last Serie A title. 2000-2001. Lazio. Lazio were back to being the biggest spenders in town following their Scudetto, albeit there was next to nothing to split themselves and Real Madrid at the start of the 2000s. Los Blancos spent €121.95 million as newly elected president Florentino Perez ushered in the club's Galactico's era, with signings like Claude Makelele, Flavio Conceição, and of course, 2000 Ballon d'Or winner Luis Figo for a world record fee from their El Clasico rivals Barcelona. Meanwhile, Lazio spent an almost identical €122.3 million, as Hernan Crespo very briefly became the most expensive player on the planet, before he was overtaken by Figo. Real Madrid won La Liga, meanwhile Lazio finished 3rd in Serie A. Roma, who won the Scudetto that season, actually had the highest net spend, with pre-Qatar PSG ranking a very narrow second. They only finished 9th though. Woeful. 2001-02. Juventus. For the first time in 8 years, Juventus had the highest transfer expenditure in all of world football, and for the first time in 9 years, AC Milan had the highest net spend. Juventus welcomed Gianluigi Buffon, Lilian Thuram and Pavel Nedved, along with current Chelsea manager Enzo Maresca, but actually had a relatively modest net spend following Zinedine Zidane's world record-breaking move to Real Madrid, and they went on to win the Scudetto, whereas AC Milan signed the likes of Rui Costa, Andrea Pirlo, and Filippo Inzaghi, with little in the way of player sales, resulting in a more than €100 million net spend, but only finished 3rd. Real Madrid, despite breaking the transfer record for the second successive season on Zidane, only ranked 9th as they literally didn't sign anyone else. 2002-03. Inter Milan. Manchester United had the highest net spend in world football in the 2002-03 season, despite only signing Rio Ferdinand for a substantial fee, albeit it was a very substantial one, whereas Inter Milan, who quite comfortably had the highest expenditure, actually made a net profit, selling Ronaldo to Real Madrid, Clarence Seedorf to AC Milan, and Vratislav Greshko to Parma for huge fees. Inter signed Hernan Crespo, Francesco Cocco and Fabio Cannavaro, finishing second that season, whereas Man United reclaimed the Premier League title. 2003-04. Chelsea. Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea in the summer of 2003, and in the 2003-04 season, for the first time in decades, an English club had the highest net spend and total transfer expenditure of any club on the planet. No other team came close. The likes of Hernan Crespo, again, Claude Makelele, Juan Sebastian Veron, Scott Parker, Glenn Johnson, Damien Duff, Joe Cole and Jeremy joined the Blues, who climbed from 4th to 2nd place under Claudio Ranieri, missing out on the Premier League title to an invincible Arsenal side by 11 points. 2004-05. Chelsea. Roman Abramovich doubled down in the 2004-05 season, forking out over €160 million for the second successive season, with almost nothing in the way of player sales. Barcelona and Juventus were the next highest spenders, heading into a season in which Juventus will be stripped of their Serie A title owing to the Calciopoli scandal, but once again, it wasn't even close. Abramovich appointed Champions League winner Jose Mourinho as Claudio Ranieri's successor, and he was given the funds to sign the likes of Ian Robben, Petr Cech and Didier Drogba, in addition to Ricardo Carvalho and Paulo Ferreira, who Mourinho took with him from Porto. The results were emphatic, as Chelsea won their first top-flight league title since the 1950s, and only their second ever, with a record-high points tally of 95, while conceding a record-low 15 goals all season. Cech and Drogba, in particular, both became all-time Chelsea greats. Meanwhile, the less said about Matija Kejman, and Yuri Jarosic probably the better. 2005-06. Chelsea. The first team to do the three-peat, as Americans would put it, in terms of spending, between the 2003-04 and 2005-06 seasons as a collective, Chelsea spent over €427 million in total, and close to €400 million net. Meanwhile, no other club spent more than €185 million in total, or more than €101 million net. In other words then, Chelsea outspent the next highest spending club in world football during Roman Abramovich's first 3 seasons at the club, namely Real Madrid, by a ratio of almost 4-1. Chelsea's spending was a bit more modest in the 2005-06 season, only narrowly eclipsing Real Madrid's, with Michael Essien and Sean Wright-Phillips the biggest hitters. Meanwhile, Newcastle were world football's third highest spenders, owing to signings like Michael Owen and Albert Luque. Interestingly, Dynamo Moscow were the 4th highest spenders on the planet, and very narrowly had the highest net spend, as the Russians splashed out over €35 million on 5 Porto players alone, including Thiago Silva, Nuno Espirito Santo and Maniche, only to finish 8th the following season and 14th, just one place above the relegation zone, the season after that. 2006-07. Real Madrid. Chelsea's era of dominance came to an end in the 2006-07 season, albeit only Real Madrid spent more than them. Somewhat bizarrely, looking back at it, West Ham were the 3rd highest spenders in world football, and the 2nd highest in net terms, as the Hammers most notably brought Argentine duo Javier Mascherano and Carlos Tevez to the club, in somewhat controversial circumstances. As the fellow unks among you will recall, West Ham avoided relegation that season by just 3 points, and were later forced to pay relegated Sheffield United a reported £20 million. Real Madrid, meanwhile, spent heavily even in Florentino Perez's absence, as Ramon Calderon was their president at the time, bringing Fabio Cannavaro, Ruud van Nistelrooy and Marcelo to the Bernabeu, among several others, during a season in which they pipped Barcelona to the title solely by virtue of having a superior head-to-head record that season, having been tied on points after 38 games. 2007-08, Real Madrid. Real Madrid doubled down in the 2007-08 season, in which they brought the likes of Arjen Robben, Pepe, Wesley Sneijder, and future club legend Royston Drenthe to the Spanish capital, narrowly outspending Manchester United, who signed Nani, Anderson, Owen Hargreaves, and Carlos Tevez on a 2-year loan deal. Madrid, who also had the highest net spend, made it back-to-back La Liga titles, while Man United won a Premier League and Champions League double. Spurs had the third highest overall and the second highest net spend, ahead of Bayern Munich and Liverpool, in what was the last season that they won a trophy, up until last season. 2008-09, Manchester City. Just as with Roman Abramovich at Chelsea in 2003, the Emiratis arrived at Man City in 2008 and quickly set about redefining the transfer market. The takeover only went through on deadline day, leaving Man City with little time to flex their financial muscles. They still attempted to hijack rivals Manchester United's move for Dimitar Berbatov, but after that collapsed, they went out and signed disgraced Brazilian Robinho, who is currently serving a 9-year prison sentence in Brazil, for a British record transfer fee. He was joined in January by Wayne Bridge, Craig Bellamy, Nigel de Jong and Shay Given, taking Man City's total spending in the Emiratis' first season owning the club up to over €130 million, and an also world-leading €130 million net. Spurs were the world's second highest spenders, following another wave of investments, as the Premier League spending power became more striking, though not yet absolute. Man City finished 10th, one place lower than the previous season, while Spurs finished 8th. 2009-10, Real Madrid. The new highest spending season of all time, though Man City went hard again in the 2009-10 season, bringing in the likes of Carlos Tevez, Emmanuel Adebayor, and another disgraced wide man in the form of Adam Johnson, Real Madrid blew everyone out of the water, breaking several records in the process. With Florentino Perez back in the hot seat, Los Blancos spent almost €260 million and €170 million net, breaking the world record fee, which had remained untouched for 8 years, not once but twice in the space of a single window, courtesy of Ballon d'Or winning duo Kaká and Cristiano Ronaldo. Fellow arrivals included Xabi Alonso, Alvaro Arbeloa and Karim Benzema, as Dutch trio Klaas-Jan Huntelaar, Arjen Robben, and Wesley Sneijder all departed for substantial fees. Though Madrid failed to win La Liga, because a generational Barcelona team won 99 points under Pep Guardiola, this proved to be an exceptional window, with Benzema and Ronaldo most notably going on to become two of the club's greatest ever players. Real Madrid were the highest spenders, not just of the 2009-10 season, but of the 2000s as a whole, in terms of both net spend and total expenditure, followed, on both fronts, by Chelsea. 2010-11, Manchester City. The Emiratis had been bested by Real Madrid in 09-10, but they weren't about to let it happen again. Under new boss Roberto Mancini, the citizens went on a €183 million spending spree, leading the way in terms of both total expenditure and net spend, as big hitters like Jerome Boateng, Yaya Toure, David Silva, Alexander Kolarov, Mario Balotelli and James Milner were all signed in just one window. They were bolstered further by the arrival of Edin Dzeko in the January window, as Man City finished third and lifted the FA Cup, their first major trophy in over 40 years. Chelsea, Liverpool and Real Madrid made up the chasing pack, followed by, I must admit I was a little surprised to discover, Genoa, who spent over €80 million on fresh faces like Miguel Veloso, Rafinha and Kevin Prince Boateng, the last of whom never actually played for the club, but less than €20 million net, as several key players also departed. They finished 10th that season. 2011-12, PSG. Another landmark state ownership takeover. Hooray! And another new highest spending club in world football, in both net and absolute terms. Juventus were the second highest spenders of the 2011-12 season as they launched their post-Calciopoli revival to kickstart a run of 9 straight Scudettos, with signings like Mirko Vucinic, Alessandro Matri and Andrea Pirlo on a free, followed by Chelsea, Roma, and brief high spenders Angie Makachkala, whose rise and fall I have made an entire video about. But in the Qatari state's hands, PSG outspent all of them. Javier Pastore, Kevin Gamero, and Blaise Matuidi were among the raft of new arrivals, along with Carlo Ancelotti, but PSG could only finish second, 3 points behind surprise Ligue 1 title winners Montpellier, who spent just €2 million that season. 2012-13. PSG. Remember that old mantra about if at first you don't succeed? Spend, spend, spend again. Well, PSG stuck to it firmly in the 2012-13 season, throwing over €150 million at the likes of Thiago Silva, Ezequiel Lavezzi, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Marco Verratti and Lucas Moura. Meanwhile, David Beckham arrived in the winter window to bid farewell to football with a final few months in the French capital. The relentless investment paid dividends, unsurprisingly, in a league typically lacking in big spenders, as PSG romped to the first of many titles under the Qataris. And you would have to say, even for their €150 million layout, in Silva, Ibrahimovic and Verratti in particular, they got excellent value for money. Chelsea were the world's next highest spenders, fresh off the back of winning the Champions League, led by Eden Hazard and Oscar's arrivals. Meanwhile, fellow Russian-owned outfit Zenit St. Petersburg were third, and second in net terms, as they splashed the cash on Portuguese Primeira Liga stars Axel Witsel and Hulk, only to finish second. 2013-14. Real Madrid. You can't keep a good man down long, nor Florentino Perez. Real Madrid flexed their financial muscles again in the 2013-14 season, following a disappointing campaign in which they had finished 15 points behind Barcelona. In came Gareth Bale, Asaya Elaramendi, and Isco in a wave of spending, which yielded mixed results. Real Madrid fell from second to third in La Liga, albeit they were much closer to the title points-wise this time around, but they won both the Copa del Rey and the Champions League, kick-starting an era in which Los Blancos became quite possibly the greatest cup team that the sport has ever seen. Monaco actually had the highest net spend, by some margin, and even their overall expenditure only narrowly trailed Madrid's, despite the fact that they had only just won promotion from Ligue 2. João Moutinho, Radamel Falcao, and James Rodriguez were the headline acts, and Monaco finished second in their first season back in Ligue 1 in 3 years. 2014-15. Manchester United. 6 of the 10 highest spending clubs in world football were Premier League teams in the 2014-15 season, as the financial disparities between English football and everywhere else continued to widen, and it was Manchester United who led the way in terms of both total and net expenditure. Having just finished 7th in their first season without Alex Ferguson for 27 years, which was also their lowest league finish in 24 years, the Red Devils splashed the cash in a bid to reassert themselves. It didn't work. Still hasn't. Angel Di Maria was the marquee signing, arriving for a British record transfer fee from Real Madrid, but he only lasted a single season at Old Trafford before being sold to PSG for a loss. He was joined by Ander Herrera, Luke Shaw, Marcus Rojo, and Daley Blind, as United finished 4th under new boss Louis van Gaal, 17 points off the title. Barcelona, Liverpool, and Atletico Madrid were the world's next highest spenders. Meanwhile, Hull City were 18th, a new PB, but would be relegated at the end of the season. Brilliant. 2015-16. Manchester City. Left disappointed at having failed to retain the Premier League title the previous season, Man City sanctioned another flurry of arrivals in the 2015-16 season, which cost them a total of more than €200 million. Future club legends Raheem Sterling and Kevin De Bruyne were signed for a combined €140 million, alongside the likes of Nicolas Otamendi and Fabian Delph. Man City fell from 2nd to 4th that season, but at least they won the League Cup. Man United, Juventus, and, you may be surprised to discover, Valencia were the world's next highest spenders, in a season where the La Liga giants spent almost €150 million on the likes of Alvaro Negredo and Joao Cancelo, but ended up appointing Gary Neville. 2016-17, Manchester City. If at first, alright Alfie, we get the point. The 2016-17 season was Pep Guardiola's first at Man City, and they backed the Catalan quite substantially in the transfer market. As Martin Di Michaelis, Richard Wright and Edin Dzeko all departed, in came Ilkay Gundogan, Nolito, Leroy Sané, John Stones, Claudio Bravo, and, in the January window, Gabriel Jesus. It wasn't enough. Man City could only finish third, 15 points behind title winners Chelsea, and Pep was dismissed as a bald fraud who'd never be heard from again. Juventus, Manchester United, and Inter Milan were the game's next highest spenders, in a mini resurgence of Serie A investment. Meanwhile, Shanghai SIPG cracked the top 10, sandwiched between Arsenal and Barcelona, as China unleashed a brief but substantial wave of investment in football. 2017-18. Barcelona. Manchester City had the highest net spend for a third successive season in 2017-18, becoming the only team other than Roman Abramovich's first 3 seasons at Chelsea to attain that feat, as Guardiola added the likes of Bernardo Silva, Ederson, Kyle Walker, Danilo, Benjamin Mendy and Aymeric Laporte to his ranks, and it turned out that he wasn't a bald fraud after all. He was bald, to be clear, just not a fraud. In terms solely of expenditure, however, it was Barcelona, for the second and last time in this entire video, who were the biggest spenders in world football. Having missed out on the La Liga title to Real Madrid by 3 points the previous season, Barca brought in Nelson Semedo, Paulinho, Ousmane Dembele, and, in the January window, Philippe Coutinho. It was the highest spending season in the history of the sport, not adjusting for football-specific inflation, but it was offset by Neymar's world record-breaking sale to Paris Saint-Germain. Despite signing Neymar for a world record fee that still stands, PSG only had the 4th highest transfer expenditure in 2017-18, sandwiched between Chelsea and Everton. Yeah, Everton. Yeah, spent it very well, didn't have any regulatory trouble after that, and won loads of trophies. 2018-19, Juventus. Juventus signed Joao Cancelo, Leonardo Bonucci and Douglas Costa for substantial fees in the 2018-19 season, as well as making Cristiano Ronaldo the most expensive footballer over the age of 30, and the most expensive signed by an Italian club of all time. Ronaldo scored plenty of goals, and Juve retained the Serie A title for the next 2 seasons, but some of their investments over this period would age pretty poorly. PSG only very narrowly trailed Juventus in terms of both total expenditure and net spend, as they made Kylian Mbappe the second most expensive footballer, and by far the most expensive teenager, in the history of the sport. Mbappe ultimately left PSG for nothing, and they won their first ever Champions League the season after he departed, but he did become their all-time leading goalscorer during the intervening period. 2019-20, Real Madrid. Los Blancos seem to reassert themselves in terms of spending every 6 or 7 years, without fail, and they were added again in 2019-20. In one of the highest spending seasons of all time, Florentino Perez unveiled the likes of Rodrigo, Ferland Mendy, Luka Jovic, Eder Militao, and the club's new record signing, Eden Hazard. Jovic and Hazard proved to be calamitous, but Real Madrid did win their first La Liga title in 3 years that season. Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, Manchester United, Juventus and Napoli all also had massive windows, as Barca brought in Frenkie de Jong, Antoine Griezmann and a handful of others for almost €300 million. Over the 2010s as a whole, Man City were the highest spenders in world football, narrowly ahead of Barcelona, Juventus, Chelsea, Man United, PSG and Real Madrid in terms of total expenditure, but miles clear of all of them when it comes to net spend. 2020-21, Chelsea. For the first time in 15 years, Chelsea were back to being the biggest spenders in world football in the 2020-21 season. Coming out of a single-season transfer embargo under Frank Lampard, With the Eden Hazard proceeds still in their back pocket, Chelsea threw over €250 million at the likes of Hakim Ziyech, Timo Werner, Ben Chilwell, Kai Havertz, and Edouard Mendy. It was a bit of a strange season, as the Blues finished 4th, Lampard was sacked, and few of their big money signings went on to become roaring successes at Stamford Bridge. Yet Chelsea lifted the Champions League under Lampard's successor Thomas Tuchel. Man City, who won the title that season, had the second highest expenditure. Meanwhile, Leeds United, who finished 9th in the Premier League following promotion from the Championship, actually had the second highest net spend, behind Chelsea, in all of world football. 2021-22, Arsenal. Following 8th place finishes in both of Mikel Arteta's first 2 seasons in charge of the club, Arsenal spent big in 2021-22, becoming the highest spending club on the planet for the first and only time in this video, in terms of either total expenditure or net spend. Ben White, Martin Odegaard, and Aaron Ramsdale were the most expensive arrivals, as Arsenal climbed to 5th in the Premier League table. The second highest net spend came courtesy of Newcastle United, following their takeover by the Saudi state, as the Magpies sanctioned £100 million of spending in the January window alone, followed, incidentally, by Roma, who signed Tammy Abraham for €40 million from Chelsea that season. 2022-23, Chelsea. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the UK decided that all of a sudden some Russian oligarchs were bad, and Roman Abramovich was sanctioned. Chelsea were effectively seized by the British government before the Blue Co consortium acquired them for a record-breaking fee for a club. While many anticipated a classic American asset management ownership regime, the Todd Bowley-led consortium actually blew even Roman Abramovich's spending habits out of the water. Even adjusted for inflation, Chelsea became by far the highest spending football club of all time. In the 2022-23 season, the Blues spent a record-breaking €630 million gross and €562 million net, as the likes of Raheem Sterling, Kalidou Koulibaly, Wesley Fofana, and Marc Cucurella joined the club. They had 4 different managers and finished 12th. Nottingham Forest, West Ham United, and Newcastle United were the world's 3rd, 4th, and 5th highest spenders, as 9 of the 10 highest spending clubs on the planet were based in England. Barcelona, the sole exception, ranked 10th. 2023-24, Chelsea. If €630 million could guarantee Chelsea 12th, then maybe €1 billion could sneak them into 6th. That was the master plan at Stamford Bridge in the 2023-24 season, and it worked a treat. A further €464 million was spent on the likes of Christopher Nkunku, Nicholas Jackson, Axel Disasi, Moises Caicedo, Romeo Lavia, and Cole Palmer, as Chelsea very narrowly outspent PSG, who brought in the likes of Manuel Ugarte, Ousmane Dembele, Gonzalo Ramos, and Randall Kolo Muani. The highest net spend in world football came courtesy of Al Hilal from the emerging force, in economic terms at least, of the Saudi Pro League. Al Hilal spent over €374 million net on Kalidou Koulibaly, Ruben Neves, Sergei Milinkovic-Savic, Malcolm, Neymar, Yassin Bunu, Alexander Mitrovic, Hassan Al-Tambakti, and Renan Lodi. Rarely has so much been spent on so little in the history of the sport. Neymar, Al Hilal's record signing, played 7 games for them and left after 16 months for nothing. 2024-25, Chelsea. Chelsea are not only the only team in this video to have done the three-peat in terms of spending, they have somehow done it twice, making it a two-peat, three-peat, if such a thing exists. Well, it must, mustn't it? They did it. The Blues were a little less exuberant last season, but only a little, laying out close to €300 million on the likes of Pedro Neto, Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, Philip Jorgensen, and Joao Felix. Is it just me, or does it feel like longer ago than last season that Chelsea signed Joao Felix on a permanent basis? Anyway, he was sold after a single season to Al Nassr for a £16 million loss. Chelsea only spent around €500,000 more than Brighton last season, who, you may be surprised to discover, had by far the highest net spend in world football and among the highest of all time. Following a raft of lucrative sales in recent years, many of them to Chelsea, the Seagulls threw near enough €300 million at Jorginho Ruta, Yankuba Minte, Mats Vifa, Brian Gruder, Ferdi Karahuklu, Matt O'Reilly, and Stefan Simos, among others. It was a busy old summer. 2025-26. Liverpool. Of course, the 2025-26 season isn't done yet, and January could change the situation. But as things stand, Liverpool are the biggest gross spenders in world football, marking their first inclusion, followed by Chelsea. Arsenal have the highest net spend, and 9 out of the 10 highest spenders, yet again, come courtesy of the Premier League. Bayer Leverkusen, the sole exception in 9th, still made a more than €30 million net profit after their squad was decimated and their best players were poached by bigger or richer clubs. Liverpool's almost €500 million window is among the heftiest in the history of the sport, and somewhat uncharacteristic, as the likes of Florian Wirtz, Hugo Ekitike, and Alexander Isak were added to what was already a title-winning squad. Currently 7th, having lost their last 4 league games, there is a bit of an inquest surrounding some of Liverpool's big money signings and their slow start to the campaign. Throughout the 2020s as a whole, up to this point, you won't be surprised to discover that Chelsea are by far the highest spenders, having spent over €2 billion in total and almost €1 billion net, followed by Man City, Man United, PSG, Arsenal, Tottenham, Liverpool, Juventus, Newcastle and West Ham. That is, 8 of the top 10 being English clubs. In case you were wondering, albeit, it is far more difficult to gather accurate data and statistics, so take some of this with a pinch of salt. The highest spenders by decade were most likely Newcastle United in the 1900s, Aston Villa and Newcastle in the 1910s, Arsenal and Newcastle in the 1920s, Arsenal and River Plate in the 1930s, Newcastle Sunderland, Independiente Santa Fe and Millonarios in the 1940s, Juventus, Real Madrid, Sunderland and the Colombians again in the 50s, Juventus and Inter Milan in the 60s, Barcelona, Real Madrid and Everton in the 1970s, and AC Milan, Inter, Juve, Napoli and Barca in the 1980s. From 1990 to 2025 as a whole, no team spent more than Chelsea's €4.29 billion, followed by Man City, Juventus, Man United and Real Madrid. In terms of net spend, it is Man United who reign supreme, followed by Man City, Chelsea, PSG and Real Madrid. Throughout the entire period, Newcastle have a higher net spend than Bayern Munich. 4 Saudi clubs already rank among the 25 highest spenders, and Guangzhou FC, Hebei China Fortune and Jiangsu, 3 clubs who no longer exist, all have a higher net spend than European giants like Celtic, Rangers, Real Betis, Borussia Dortmund and Hull City. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure, ever more urgent, that you are subscribed both to this channel, HITC Sevens, and also for longer or more documentary style and to camera videos, my second channel, or sister channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on social media, typically via the username @HITC Sevens, should you wish to do so. And you can now support my work additionally, should you be a real mega fan and, just a stand-up person, really. All the good people are doing it. By heading over either to the Alfie Potsama YouTube channel, where you can become a channel member, or leave a super thanks, or by going to buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potsama, where you can do the same thing, become a channel member, or leave a one-time donation, but Google won't take almost a third of it. So preferable, but either are great, as are neither. But they are better than neither. But all is good. I'll see you all next time. Please take care up there. I love you very much. Cheers.